there was item 13. That bit there was item 13.
Thank you. It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to begin promptly, please. Okay, welcome to the meeting. I'm just going to read a statement first. In accordance with the Openness of Local Bodies Regulations 2014, this meeting is being live streamed and may otherwise be recorded, filmed or communicated on other media platforms. The recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. Both councillors and officers in attendance are reminded to make full use of and to speak clearly into the microphones available at all times. A reminder that mobile phones should be put on silent mode. Those present at the meeting should refrain from taking phone calls. Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Mr. Ball.
Chair, apologies from Councillors Bentley, Ridley, Linda Wardley, Frank Wardley and Dean Gamble. Councillor Bolton is in the nurse and is not considered present for voting purposes. Thank you.
So you will be allowed to...
We will be able to participate in debate, but won't be counted for vote, will be counted for that purpose.
Thank you. Appointment of substitutes?
No substitutes, Chair.
Declarations of interest, are there any? No, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, may I sign?
Move.
Thank you. Petitions and deputations?
None received, Chair.
Yep. Okay. Item number 7, ethical standards and indicators. Usual quarter 2 report. Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair has intimated, this is the usual quarter 2 report. There's nothing of any note on the report. There's no complaints against the code of conduct which have had to be dealt with, and the rest of the information contained in the report shows information in respect of performance indicators for FOI, data protection, food safety inspections, ASB, etc. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got any.
Are there any questions on this report? No. On page 15, FOIs, it gives a number. Is it possible to have the breakdown of those FOIs in terms of media, residents or other? I mean, is it mainly media driven?
Actually, no. I mean, you get a wide variety. Some of them will be individuals, but we don't know whether they're residents because the FOI Act is request to blind. Some of them may be from academics. Some of them will be from research bodies like Shelter and other places like that. So there's a varied mix, and it would be quite complicated to provide a list of all of the various people that have made those requests, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And just one more, please. On page 17, antisocial behaviour indicators. Under the top table where it says quarter 2, in the right-hand column, it's got a split. Can you explain that to me?
Yes, Chair. The split is that those in blue or black, as it is, are housing ASB figures, which are dealt with by the housing team, and those in red are the figures for the ASB officer, whose main role is dealing with antisocial behaviour in all other aspects other than our housing stock.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on that one? No, thank you. Recommendation was to note the report. Duly noted. Agenda item 8, Treasury Management Annual Report. Tracy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present the performance and activities of the Council's Treasury Management function for last year, 2021-22. It's one of 2 reports that members receive within a year on Treasury. The first is the Treasury strategy for the forthcoming year, and then this report is a backward-looking report on the performance against that Treasury strategy. There were no issues of non-compliance for last year, and there are no areas where the Council did not meet its own adopted and approved Treasury management practices. I must point out the table at Appendix A is incorrect, and I apologise for this. The totals on that table, and it's page 25, should read 184 transactions and £103,061, so apologies for that error. As detailed in the report, the council is more of a borrower than a lender, and the report sets out the movements in the year. There has been more of a shift to short-term borrowing, which is currently serving us better than borrowing long-term, actually, as margins are closing. So we'll continue to assess this and make sure that we're minimising interest costs for the council. We invested very little in the year, as set out, and finally we complied with all of our prudential indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any questions, please? Kevin Lloyd.
Thank you for the report. On the page 25, a simple question really is about the due diligence of the investments associated with this report.
Sure. So there is a local authority name there, which I'm sure all members have recently read about within the local government trade press and the financial difficulties that Thurrock Borough Council face. As it stands, we do not have any investments placed with this council any longer, so they have repaid all of their loans to us by the time that they were due. During the summer, our Treasury, or late summer, our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, recommended to its clients that they didn't make any further investments with Thurrock. We have not done so. And also, the implications perhaps around reputation, we've also introduced additional measures before officers place any investments with other local authorities. So we have enhanced our due diligence recently, and those decisions where they're marginal or there are concerns with officers, they would come directly to me.
Thank you for the report and thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well done.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question in regards to the borrowing, short-term and long-term. With the interest rates, how will it affect our capital programme, in particular with regards to the interest rates there? Will it be in terms of time? So we've got to pay back the loan, but at the same time, with the time that we're going to spend in our capital programmes, will that affect it than having a short-term loan as opposed to a long-term?
No. In a nutshell, no, because we would just refinance. So in many respects, the financing is quite separate from the thing that we're doing in the capital programme. So the thing that we're spending money on, we will continue with that. If a short-term loan becomes due, we just refinance, and we'll always refinance at a point that is obviously most preferable in line with the council's overall spending needs. So the nature of treasury management isn't so much that you always sort of have that relationship between a loan and the thing that you're doing. Sometimes you do, but quite often actually we just put all of our borrowing into the mix as a council. So we might have these capital schemes and then we go and borrow. The trade-off is where interest costs are not manageable. So interest costs is a charge against revenue. So you do the thing in capital, enhancing, creating an asset, acquiring an asset. You fund it through borrowing. You either borrow that from yourself because you've got spare cash, or you borrow it from the market, short-term or long-term. The point where you are doing so much in terms of capital works, there will be a point where those interest costs are not manageable because the interest cost on your revenue account is unsustainable. And if that, if interest costs get too high, unfortunately, there are local authorities that have had to pull, postpone, not go forward with capital programme items because they can't afford the revenue interest costs.
Come back.
Yes, please. So if we're going for short-term loans to fund our capital programmes and then we'll have to refinance, surely that would be more expensive than having a long-term loan over a period of time? Sorry?
Absolutely, you would think so. But however, the credit market is a very interesting beast. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert by any means. The latest session that we had with our Treasury advisors was that the outcome was that our recommendation was that we needed to stay agile and stay ready to respond for when the market changes. But the margins that used to be quite big, so you used to have much cheaper finance when you borrowed long term, and you paid a lot more of a premium when you borrowed short term. That margin is closed. So actually, it's not as cost effective to lock in long term. And if you don't need the money long term, which in a lot of the cases we don't, because some of our schemes are really short term, we've got no need to finance for 10, 20, 30 years because actually we don't need the money for that long. So therefore we've stuck with the short-term borrowing, which is cheaper and more cost-effective based on our cash flow. It may change and we may look at that, but that's the situation we're in.
Councillor Lilly, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Am I right in saying that the bodies that we borrow from, we get better terms than when people are local authorities, than people who borrow commercially? Am I right in saying that?
Yes, we local authorities predominantly borrow from the Public Works and Loans Board, or PWLB. Local authorities can access borrowing at, they call it 100 basis points below the Bank of England rate, so that's 1% below the Bank of England rate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got one on page 32. Item 8 there, ethical investment strategy. It mentions about members, a member of the council. Is there any recourse from members of the public should they have concerns over our ethical investment strategy?
I think if any member, council member or indeed any member of the public had any concerns, that they have a right to raise them. They also have a right to speak to the auditors anyway on any financial matter. So yes, they do. I think we'll take that on board, Chair. We will be updating the Treasury Management Strategy alongside the budget in February. We'll take that theme on board and make some adjustments in terms of members of the public also. It is a public-facing document, and so the members of the public can access it, but we'll just make that clear.
Thank you. Okay, that the content of the report and appendices be noted. All happy with that, thank you. Agenda item 9. Let me just... We have various updates.
Where is that?
Chair,
Yes.
clarify, certainly on my right, agenda item 9 is the first agenda update on.
I'm just about to do this, Mr. Boyce, thank you. We have had various agenda updates since the papers were first published. The first one is the budget monitoring one, because these papers were issued on the 28th of November. The update to that was issued on the 30th of November. On agenda item 11, the draft revenue budget medium-term financial plan, that update was issued on the 1st of December, and then there will be an urgent item at the end of this meeting, item 13, and that update was issued today. And we'll address that when we get to it. So, agenda item 9, budget monitoring. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. So I repeat the report. It's a standard report and provides the quarter 2 position, not much movement on the general fund, and adverse movement on the reasons for that. There is also some slippage identified on the capital programme, so although we're making progress in the financial year, just one section I'd like to give you a new section as a one-off for this report, which is some additional information about our reserves and review of the earmarked reserves that are undertaken as part of the first step of our sustainability programme, where we were looking to identify any earmarked reserves that were no longer needed, and we repurpose them back to general fund and allocated reserves for the purpose of bolstering and managing the budget. So I've done that piece of work, that report sets out, and it's recommended that the committee ratify that decision as set out. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Questions, please. Councillor Kevin Lord.
Just one for clarification, page 17 of the additional code. The fourth one down refers to new internal website. £10,000, it's research into design currently underway. £10,000 associated with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair, if I can pass over to Trish. I don't know if she's got that bit open, and if you heard that okay, Trish, it was about the new internal website and the comments about the research into design currently underway.
As you said.
Are you there, Trish?
Chat message, she can't hear, so.
Okay.
Jared, I think it's helpful. If we went through this report page at a time, hopefully Trish would be online by the time we get to that point.
Okay, let's start on page, well, I may not have the same page as you, but I've got page 5, which is forecast for each service area. You all got that?
I'll clear on that one.
Any questions on that page? Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. Several, if I may. SLT 15,000. Now, I think it's past November 22nd, so should that be minus 65? That's the first question.
Mr Gill.
Thank you, Chair. The position is that we received notification yesterday that the court had granted an order which now enables us to re-register Bushlow developments on the Companies House register. Once that has been completed, there are some administrative steps that we need to take. The Treasury solicitor has raised no objection, and so hopefully in the not too distant future we will receive from the bank the monies that were due to us when the accounts were closed down.
Mr Boyce.
Thank you. So technically, we will cost it minus 65 because mine at some point. Future, that's fine. Can I just make check on table 3.2, inflation pay, which also applies to each and every other table. All you've done is for those people that work under that section, you've taken full-time equivalent and times it by £1,925 to achieve that figure.
Who would like to answer that one?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Right. On the inflation pay,
Yeah.
the way you arrived at 33,000 in this section and all of the other sections is by taking the full-time equivalents within that finance and resources in this case, timesing it by 1,925 to achieve that figure, and thus giving us an overall figure of 184,000, which is 98 times 1,925, which is the full-time equivalent to the authority.
I will defer to my finance manager on that level of detail. I would expect not, because there are other impacts associated with that inflationary increase, such as national insurance, such as pension contributions from an employee perspective.
Yeah, so if I can answer that, yes, it's actually done literally per FTE and how many hours they work. It's not the full 2,000, it's a portion about, if they're joined mid-year, there will be a portion on that, so it was done very accurately in that sense.
Okay.
That answers your question? Yeah.
Okay, any more Councillor Boyce?
No, I'm fine.
Right, still on this page, Councillor Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, first, the corporate management, non-financial. I know Councillor Allen just asked about the interest rate. If there's 20,000 overspend, was that just in Q2, and did we have any room in the budget at the start of the year, taking into account the increase in interest rate?
So the budget for interest, was put together literally this time last year, and there was no predictions around the interest on what's happened this year. And even since we delivered the Q1 report in September, we've seen the Bank of England put their rates up, what date did it? Just before the autumn statement, I think it was. We've seen some dramatic movements from the Bank of England, all of which were unanticipated this time last year. So No, the budget wasn't, there isn't capacity, so it is, you know, it is an overspend. There was no over provision in that budget to cater for what has happened. And, you know, I think building on the previous report, we have got a Treasury advisor, we meet with them regularly, and around that very point of, you know, borrowing, we are looking at minimising that interest costs as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Next question is net cost of benefits, 66,000. That seems quite a lot of money. Is that, can we have a little bit of explanation regarding that one?
So I can hand over to Adrian. Apologies, Adrian. I'm sorry, no, I don't think this is a built environment one. I do apologise.
Were those benefits paid in advance to people, or is what?
Yeah, so
that overspent come about?
So the nature of benefits, I mean, it's quite typical that we end up in scenarios where individuals have had a change in circumstances and as such they have been overpaid benefits for a period of time. So it's quite standard practice that then local authorities have a need to recover overpaid housing benefit. So there is a reduction there in terms of the forecast recovery on those benefit overpayments. So we're assuming that we're going to collect less. So it's a budget pressure. Do you want to add any more?
Yeah, sorry. What I want to say is what we've done is a mid-year rest. So we have mid-year actuals that come through. On those bases, we've made a forecast in terms of what's come through and what we assume the overpay, how much of the overpayments we will get and not get. And that's why that's actually a large number that's filtered through into quarter two, which you wouldn't have seen in quarter one.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Hack?
Yeah, so what you say, this has not actually been paid out, it's just an estimate of overspent.
We have the prepayments that have already been paid out, and then it's the collection rate of how much of that's actually retrieving back, and it's how much of that what we've estimated that we should be getting back in the budget. And we said we won't meet that budget by 66k.
Right,
is what we're trying to say.
I think the theme here is that this is just an estimate based on actuals. So the actual performance so far has lent itself to that being a forecast towards the end of the year. So we will monitor it again at quarter three, and we'll provide another update.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen on this page.
Thank you, Chair. I seem to be at somewhat disadvantage in the sense that I checked all my paperwork and I don't have agenda item number 9 to really have any paperwork if we can talk about. But I am interested in just knowing what's our total, how much reserves have we clawed back in total, and in terms of spending that reserve, how far are we going into it?
So the words clawing back are interesting because in fact it's our own money in reserves.
So it's just that historically we've set aside different amounts of funds called it, and we've called them earmark reserves. In total, we are, and I'll call it repurposing. We're repurposing. Sorry, I haven't got the figures on the top of my head. I believe it's £350,000 on the general fund. Apologies. Can I come back to you within the meeting just on that point? Thank you. Sorry, the report should state the amount, but it doesn't.
Just the total amount, and also how much of those reserves do you predict that will be spending?
Sure.
Sorry, Chair, to butt in. Samuel, have you actually got a copy of tonight's agenda that you can lend Councillor Allen so that he can read agenda item 9?
I understand the papers were sent out and are on the public website. Okay, while Councillor Ellam's looking at that and Tracy is sourcing those figures, the other person to speak on this page was Councillor Jossie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the finance systems of the overspend for 35k, 35,000. Was that not all part of the transformation budget that was set aside when we did all the transformation last year? And why the overspend? If I may ask.
Sure. I can answer, no, it wasn't part of the IT transition budget. This is a different income management system that is used in finance. It was part of this area, so it's something that was overlooked and now we have to pay an extra amount annually for that. So it's something that came because of it, but it's not, it wasn't part of the budget, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
How was it overlooked? Was it just missed out?
I suppose it's one of those things in IT transition, it was part of their contract. It wasn't something that would have, I think, you know, the council would have even thought of, that you'd have to pay a separate subscription for this income management system. It's only 2 years old, just to add to it, it's not an old system.
No.
So it's only 2 years old. And
We could let Philippa just come in.
Oh.
Philippa?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rashpal. Councillor Joshi, it wasn't overlooked. Basically, there was an awful lot of unpicking when we did the transition across to have an internal IT system. These two elements were historical, and actually moving forward, when we were handed over the information, weren't given as part of the transfer pack over, and therefore we had to re-sign those contracts. So from a state of overlooking, it wasn't. Yes, as I say, a lot of unpicking to enable us to transition, and that's why you see that overspend there.
Thank you, Philippa. Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to add to that, I have spoken at this committee before about how the budget was set last year and how we're taking a very sort of more detailed incremental approach to budget setting this year.
I think just to give you that assurance around that line, you know, that line by line approach in terms of setting future year budgets. So, you know, we picked up these items
and we're managing them within current resources. But you know, clearly that we brought that issue to you, and the nature of budget setting is that, you know, that will probably hang around until we're into the new financial year in April. Councillor Allen, just to your point.
Can I just come back?
Sure, that's okay.
So will that mean that we're going to have to borrow more to clear that? Because we can't keep dipping into reserves, I'm assuming.
No, we won't need to borrow any more. We have reserves that are sufficient. So to Councillor Allen's
point, how much are we going to use of reserves this year? The current forecast
for total expenditure on the general fund is a £611,000 overspent. So that's set out on page 3 on the report summary. £611,000 overspent this year. The majority of that is linked to inflation, and that will be taken directly from our general fund reserves, to which we have enough reserves to cover that year. Later on the budget report on this agenda, we're talking about a deficit on next year's budget. Okay, and you know, that is the point where in my initial estimate of my initial comments around robustness of reserves and adequacy of our robustness of our estimates, and adequacy of reserves, I do make comment around, you know, our reserves will be depleted if this forecast comes to crystallise, and if indeed the deficit projected next year comes to crystallise also. On the housing revenue account, slightly different position, Councillor Allen, we're looking at a £204,000 deficit, and utilisation, there are reserves sufficient there. To the question that was, how much are we bolstering our general fund and HRA general reserves by going through this repurposing exercise? Is to the tune of £430,000 on the general fund, which will take our general fund unallocated reserves to 1.55 million. And that's at paragraph 6.5 of the report on page 15. And on the housing revenue account, we're repurposing 330,000, which takes the level of reserves to 1.48 million.
Thank you.
A well worthwhile exercise, I'd suggest, in terms of bolstering those reserves and being able to cushion the impact of this inflation position in year.
Thank you, Tracy. Still on this page, Councillor Lily Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure what page we're on, actually. I've sort of lost the plot a bit. Page 13, earmarked reserves. Can I talk on reserves?
You've jumped ahead somewhat, but
Right.
go to the page by page approach.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
So can I ask, I'm sorry, what page are you currently on?
5.
Right, thank you.
Any more questions on page 5? Page 6, which has the heading Law and Democracy in the Built Environment at the bottom. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a general comment, but on this one it shows up better, which is mitigation actions update. You're going to tell me, of course, there shouldn't be any because they're all positive figures. Clearly, taxi licensing isn't. So, is there any mitigation going on? And that applies to the rest of the report.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of taxi licensing, the reason why that there is a change is that we are actually doing a more accurate budget. It's always been the case in the past that there's been a figure that has been put in there. Taxi licences, the vehicle licences are annual, and we know exactly how many vehicles we have licensed, and therefore we can identify how many vehicles, or next year, for instance, are due to be licensed during the course of the year. Driver's licences are 3-year, so we know that next year some of our taxi drivers will renew and others won't be required. So what we've been doing, we have been getting reports to forecast exactly how many vehicles are to be licensed and exactly how many drivers are to be licensed, and that is at a variation with the guesstimate that has previously been the case, because basically, historically, we've just put a figure in that area, and normally we've overachieved on it. But the result is that you are getting a more accurate level of forecasting, and on this occasion, it has actually reduced the projected income. Next year, in the budget, the figure will be much more accurate. And in terms of the mitigation, one of the big issues, of course, is that we are competing against people like Wolverhampton, who will offer to do you a taxi licence in 2 days. So it's a difficult one, and a lot of our drivers are moving away across to other authorities.
So, in essence, what could have got in the mitigation update was moving from a guesstimate to a more accurate assumption, thus there'll be a saving in subsequent years, but rather than an empty column. I think that's the point. It's the empty column that, if we're going to put it there, we should fill it. If we're not, because most of the reasons for the variance actually give the mitigation. So it's just slightly untidy.
I agree. Okay. Anything else on that page? Okay, the next page, which carries on the built environment, page 7. Councillor Hack was first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment rather than a question. Economic development. I know there's a vacancy and there's saving of 31k. We do have to be mindful of having the saving is good, but I think that's an important post, and that could generate income and pay for itself. So just a comment there that saving shouldn't be classed as a very good saving, and maybe we should carry on with it. Just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor.
That one. And I've got another one. Homelessness. On the same page. got a question. It says, it's going to relate to my question earlier on, housing benefit recovery, and that's leading to homelessness. How do we work on those two, that we don't play one against the other? It seems like we're paying more in homelessness and we're recovering less money.
I don't know.
So it's costing us more on both ends. Can we have a coordinated approach where we work to reduce the homelessness and make sure that we don't overpay in the first place that can lead to homelessness?
We don't want a vicious circle.
Yeah.
Mr Gill.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just make a couple of comments. The first point is, as Mrs Bingham said earlier, what tends to happen in terms of overpaid housing benefit is that the claim is assessed on the information that is given to the council, and then at some point in the future there is a change in circumstances and the applicant who is under a duty to notify the council of those changes doesn't. And then what will happen is at some point we get notification through from DWP that Universal Credit or whatever has altered or changed, and it will be backdated to the time that it was. And that is what creates the overpayment, which then becomes difficult to recover because obviously normally they've got a reduced income because of that change in circumstance in any event. And the second point, in terms of homelessness, there is no direct correlation between overpayment of housing benefit and homelessness, because overpaid housing benefit is not something for which you can obtain an eviction notice for. So there's no direct correlation between the two. Okay.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Yeah, just very quickly. Regarding the temporary accommodation as well, is that something we're going to look at in the future? I know it's been temporary for quite some time. Can we look at having something permanent, which is going to reduce cost?
Who was going to do that?
That's going to be Adrian then.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is something that we are actively looking at, and we're looking at the broader scheme whereby the council would be able to act as a landlord for if you are private sector homes and they want to rent out, and then we would be able to put together a stock of properties that we could use rather than using hotel accommodation, for example. Just back to development as well, Councillor, just to give you insurance that that's, we are looking at bringing forward an additional economic regeneration officer based in the regeneration team.
Thank you. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. Can I just check, the variance you're given is at the end of Q2, is that correct? Or is it projected to the end of the year? Right. In which case, on homelessness, you're projecting to 68,000. Is that optimistic?
Same time with last year almost.
Yashpal?
I think at this stage, Councillor Boyce, we've made the forecast in line with last year and in line with, actuals and the pattern of expenditure that has taken place historically. We will always have a look at it and revise that forecast forward. That may change. I don't
believe that we are being optimistic.
Bearing in mind that previously, I'm old enough to actually remember 16% inflation. A fair number of people here are not. Therefore, how you predict, bearing in mind in the last couple of years, the inflation rate was nowhere near what it is today. I think 68,000 may well turn out to be optimistic. So I think that's something we may need to look at in more detail in future. Moving on, Belmont House Hostel. I thought the pandemic was over, and therefore the restrictions during the pandemic should have been taken off, or is that not the case? And I have one more question after that, if I may.
Adrian?
It is correct that in terms of restrictions that were applied during the pandemic, we can be a bit more flexible now, but it's going to take some time to convert hospital back to its original form, but we're currently in the process of doing that work.
Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. In which case, finally, 57,000 other. That's not a statement, that's a question.
Who would like to answer £57,000 worth of other?
Can I come back to you on that one, John? So I'll do a breakdown of what that 57 consists of and get something back to you on that.
Could you come back to the whole committee, please, on that?
Of course, yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chair. Yes, I'm perfectly happy to accept that this time. However, I think any variance which is over 10,000 should always be specified. Omnibusing 57,000, I mean, you've either got an awfully large number of variances or there's something large in there, in which case anything over 10,000 should always be specified.
Agreed. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
The question is around planning control and the figure of 179,000. When you look at what's in the other box in terms of the statement of how much work that's going to be carried out, and in terms of a planning officer, a permanent planning officer being hired, what is the cost of that? Is that the cost on the old sort of employment of what it would be for an officer against what the projected cost is, or is that 290 by what we actually predict that we're going to spend on a planning officer? Sorry, did my question a bit unclear?
Yes, could you
come again? Okay.
Could you refine that, please?
So there's two things I want to know. The first thing I want to know is how did you get to the 179,000? Is that based on what you would employ, you predicted in terms of what you would pay for a permanent planning officer as opposed to a staff, a temporary officer? And was that on the old salaries that you gave, or is that a projected salary that you'd give? And considering the amount of work that you've got, do you think that that's a pessimistic assessment for 179, or do you think that you're probably going to have you're going to probably need a little bit more money for a temporary officer?
Adrian, give it a go.
Thank you, Chair. The forecast is based on the cost of hired staff, so it's not based upon the cost of a permanent post, it's based upon hired staff costs. In terms of where we are at the moment, I think that that's a reasonable assessment of where we'll be at the end of the financial year. As we set out in the mitigation there, we know that we've got some large applications coming in. We know that the team that we've got at the moment, although including some higher staff, is a really good team. It's doing really well in terms of reducing our backlog of planning applications. And the other thing that I would add is that we're currently looking to recruit on a permanent basis and to planning officer posts, and we're on the outside at the moment. So if we're successful in that recruitment, then that will reduce our higher staff costs.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Joshi.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, going over what Councillor Allen said about the 179, I'm a bit concerned that we've lost good staff, but we've actually paid 279k for agency staff. Now that seems a very expensive way to work. Would it not have been better to offer more money to the people leaving because they were with us for many years? And also I am getting from my residents that planning applications are not being processed timely. They're still being very much delayed, and I understand that because that's about the staff not being available. But I'm a bit concerned that we're spending so much money on agency staff, and it says in the mitigation column you've got £19,000 per 13 week for an agency member. I don't understand why we're spending so much. I know we don't have the staff, but surely there's a cheaper method.
I think you have residents in a disadvantage here, because I wasn't aware that the 8-week or 13-week determination periods were unduly not being kept to. I wasn't aware of that. Whether any other members are, I don't know. But Adrian, can you answer the question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In fact, in terms of the first part of the question about losing staff, of course, staff leave for many different reasons. It's not always regarding salary. It might be career progression, for example. So I think we need to take that into account as a starting point. And also some of the staff that we lost that were currently covering the reasons as well weren't particularly long-term members of staff before they left in any case. The other thing to bear in mind is in terms of planning, it is a really, really difficult area to recruit on a basis too. That's not just an issue faced by this council, my colleagues around Leicestershire and certainly wider across the country, but also really is a shortage of being able to recruit on a permanent basis planning staff. We're certainly not the only ones who are having to resort to agency staff. The other issue, because of that situation that I've just described, is that agency staff can actually set the rate at which we need to pay on an hourly rate to have staff fulfilling those roles and covering the roles. So agency staff are expensive to recruit to as well. On the other hand, we need to carry on determining planning applications. It's statutory function of the council. If we don't do that, then we find ourselves in special measures. And that's not something that we want to do. Councillor Dotty referred to some residents that haven't had their applications determined in due time. I suspect that was a few months ago now, because the backlog was significantly reduced. I'm seeing the number of applications that are coming in at the moment have been going through the system of validation quicker. And I'm seeing that we're actually able to turn out the rest of those applications within the set time scale. Obviously, there's some exceptions, usually amended plans or similar, but that's normal and to be expected. So, in terms of our determination rate, we're now doing well compared to our peers across Leicestershire. As I said just now, moving forward, we're looking to recruit to 2 of our planning based on a permanent basis. I really hope that we're successful in being able to do that, because that will enable us to release the agency staff.
Thank you. Councillor Joshi?
If you don't mind, thank you. Thank you for that, Adrian, but are we making money though? Because it looks like we're not making any money from that. Even though you say we're reducing the backlog, we're still spending a lot more than what we're getting in, because people are also going away to other building control offices. They're not staying with us. You know, That's a different thing. I can't see, because this is going into 2023 next year, the costs and the team. So does that mean that we're going to be paying £19,000 per 13-week for agency staff?
Thank you.
In terms of our income, we're actually above target, and that's in the boat below. So our income for planning application fees is up on what we were budgeting for, so that's really positive. In terms of people going elsewhere, in terms of building regulations officers, that's building control that I think we're referring to. That's not what we're talking about this evening. And just to comment on the £19,000 per 13 weeks period, yes, that is correct. That's what it costs us, unfortunately, to hire agency staff to cover leave income roles. But the point I was making there, and I think it's an important point to make, I was referring to determining major applications. And in the past, our approach as a small council with a small team has been to put those major applications out to external consultancy to determine for us. What I'm hoping that we can do through the arrangement at the moment is to have the applications determined in-house. It will actually be a saving for us, but what it will also do is allow those staff to do other work at the same time. So they're not just determining a single application. We're getting more value for money out
doing it that way.
Tracy?
If I can, Councillor Joshi, just to respond and add a little bit more information. I mean, there is a national shortage of planners, so it's not unique to Oakley and Wigston Borough Council, and we are fortunate in that we've been able to secure some agency staff to bolster our resources and to be able to work, again, against the historical backlog, but then also just the normal pipeline of applications.
Your point around planning for income. Planning for income is determined by central government. We have no control over the
standard planning fees. The government consulted to raise major and minor planning applications by 35% and 25% respectively earlier this financial year. We've not heard anything from that, but I do know that District Council Network are lobbying central government hard on this issue. That would certainly give local authorities more opportunity to engage, staff, but also to set the level of fees and charges more commensurate with the services provided.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind?
Once more.
Adrian, with the reference I was making for building control was, when I spoke to Anne Court about this, building control, once the plan's done and the plan has been approved, nobody actually goes out to see that they're building according to the plan. We used to have an enforcement officer, again, unfortunately, he's left. So what I'm saying is, why do we not offer the building control as part of the planning? I get what you're saying, but I still don't think that even with 2 planning officers coming on board that you mentioned that we're trying to recruit, I understand overall there's a shortage, etc. But we're still paying an agency a lot of money. Surely that could be renegotiated somehow. I mean, that's a lot of money, 19,000 for a 13-week.
Standard agency rates, I would imagine. Adrian, you would respond to that?
That is correct, it's standard agency rates, and at the moment in development control, it's an agency planners market because they can charge those rates and still get employment. If they didn't get employment, their rates will come down. But as I said, there's a national shortage of planners across the country. So it's not just us in that situation. In terms of the point about building offices like that, I understand the point that you're referring to enforcement and the fact that when the planning application is granted, clearly the applicant is required to build to those plans. What we don't do is send somebody out, an enforcement officer, to check that's what they're doing. And no council, I would suggest, does that either, even if they've got a large enforcement officer team. The approach that we take is if somebody reports to us that something isn't being built as per the plans, then we'll send the enforcement officer out to investigate them. And that's the way we've always operated in this council.
We've been on this planning issue now for some time, so unless it's something new, I'm going to move on. Councillor Boyce.
A very quick question, if I may. Building control and planning, are they allowed to make a profit, yes or no?
Building control, that's planning, no.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Boyce, Bolter, unmute, please.
Oh, why did you say that?
I know.
You've tried many years. Going back to Belmont House, Chair, I've been on about this now for a couple of years. That figure there is completely incorrect because when we reduced the occupancy there, that figure should have been removed anyway. That was based on the 4 families using the accommodation, not the 2. So that's where that figure's come from. It's still got 2 families in there, and we are hoping to get more in there when it's reconfigured. But until it's reconfigured, that figure should be readjusted.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Much help. Councillor Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, mine is on planning. I know we've kept an eye on this one and it has improved considerably. Mr. Thorpe, I just wanted to ask, it would give us some reassurance do we benchmark what we're spending or how much we're spending on agency staff against other councils? Because it has been mentioned that it's not exclusive to us.
Mm-hmm. We haven't done any benchmarking recently, but certainly through my planning officer I can see if I can do something on that over the next few months, and then bring it back to the committee.
If it's any help, if Leicestershire County Council didn't use agency staff, they would grind to a halt very quickly. Right, next page, please. Community and Wellbeing. Councillor Boyce?
Thank you. It's a point rather than a question. Cemeteries, I can understand the issue. However, at services last week, the number of burials appears to have gone up. So that may well reflect these figures later. However, I don't know whether 26 is an upwards or a downwards trend. I just wonder if, rather than spend too much time on the mitigation, which I think is actually in the reason, as I said earlier, we could put quarter one and quarter two on the variance, then you'd see whether it's improving or getting worse. That might be helpful.
Do you mean if there are more burials and...
No, I mean, on the report, if you put quarter one in and quarter two, because if you take SLM contractual variance, that actually is improved. So by putting quarter one in, you can see which direction we're moving in.
Okay.
So some of these will move about.
Tracy?
Take that on board, Councillor Boyce. There will be a balance to the level of information that we prepare in a report. Perhaps I could bring back something that, in terms of a new template, that at least shows the direction of travel with a simple arrow since the last quarter.
Yes.
But I'll take that on board and try to balance the level of detail within the report.
Thank you. Anything else on community and wellbeing? Next page, waste services. On the following page, and then into customers.
Sorry, Joe.
Councillor Boyce?
How can we have another as a saving? I can't see how you can have an other saving money.
I think that should be included in the response about all the others.
We can give it, we'll give a full breakdown of the others throughout the report, but yes, there can be, it's not necessarily income, it could be small income budgets, it could be a small underspend that we're projecting to the end of the year. They could, yeah, we'll come back to you on the detail.
Worked out there's an underspend on something, you might as well have told us where it was on.
Again, it comes down to the level of detail within this report and deployment of scarce resources that we have across the organisation to explain every single variance and budgetary forecast change. So that's why the report is at the level of detail that it is. Take on board that some areas that members would like more detail, but for us in developing that report.
I'm suitably chastised.
Yeah.
Now for the Jeffrey
Can I refer to garden waste, and this follows a conversation I had with Mr. Gill earlier on. I work with the fact that we've got 6,000 bedrooms, if I understand it. Is it possible to find out how much it costs to collect in the fee, please? I'd like to see that figure because I've been given information that my suggestion of signing people up to direct debits is a very expensive way of doing it. So I'd like a comparison because most businesses that have regular clients want their people to pay in regularly without having to do anything. And I think we might be able to make something that I'd be interested to know the comparison as to what it costs a month. Thank you.
Mr. Gill, do you have that information?
No, thank you for that, Chair. For context, for the other members, there was a conversation held this morning as part of the council meeting pre-brief, and Councillor Corcoran raised the question of why don't we allow people to pay for their garden waste on direct debit and have a reoccurring direct debit to alleviate the need for people to contact us every year. I raised that question this afternoon with customer services team leader. She advised me that she or the council had looked at that possibility when they were looking at the scheme. They said that that possibility was too expensive because there is a cost involved. On the basis of what Councillor Corfin has just requested, I will go back and ask for further information as to the costs that would be incurred and also the current cost of renewing them. And I believe, Chair, that Mrs Fisher would like to make a comment on that.
Philippa?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Gill. I think from the meeting that we had with PFD previously, one of the comments and one of the takeaways was to look at that. Whilst Mr Gill has done that, which is spoken to the Customer Services Centre manager, I think it is worth investigating again and to come back to members with a definite yes or potential no, or no about whether that is actually achievable or not, and the cost implications on that.
Thank you.
Can I?
Come back, Councillor Calvin.
Yeah, I just want to say, while you're investigating it, I understand that Harborough District Council don't issue the plastic bits that we stick on dustbins. Their vehicles have programmed into something which tells them which premises to sort of collect the rubbish from. So we can avoid the use of plastic and the cost of it. It may be part of the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. Duly noted. Anybody else on this? And customer services at the bottom of that page.
Just to note, 23,000 other.
Thank you. Then we go to the general fund budget monitoring, which gives us the overall picture of the situation. It's clear that inflation, pay, cost pressures are having a serious impact on this council and every other council. Let's not kid ourselves. Quite an increase in forecast outturn. Councillor Lily Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. Page 13, I noticed that you mentioned the RDF money, which I presume is going to run out. And was it worth a mention? Because I'm surprised that we've still got a bit of European money.
Tracy?
If you can ask Adrian to comment on that, please.
Adrian?
Yes, I can do. Members will remember that we were missing the RDF funding 6-7 years ago, perhaps now. And it was that funding that we used to try to take public health improvements in town centres. What that's saying is actually we have some funding in wage rates development that we also put towards the scheme. So that funding is become available in our reserves.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, the rest of the document, HRA reserves, general reserves, anything? Capital programme? Then there's the appendix. Okay. No, right, thank you. Okay, the recommendations are that we note the report and the appendix, and B, that we ratify the decisions of the 151 officer to repurpose earmarked reserves. I shall move it. Thank you. Seconded by Kevin Lloydell. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. We're now on agenda item 10, the local development scheme. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. The local development scheme is a statutory document that sets out our timetable for producing our local plan. It must be reviewed and updated periodically. Government have an ambitious target of all councils should have an up-to-date local plan in place by the end of 2023. Our local plan remains up to date. However, we are making a concerted effort to review our plan as close to this date as possible to limit the risk of having an out-of-date plan in the future. The new local development scheme therefore sets out an ambitious timetable that will see the council adopt a new local plan in September 2024. it's recommended that the Equal Development Scheme is approved, and I'm happy to take any questions from you.
Thank you, Adrian. It is nice to see that we, as usual, are ahead of the game in terms of local development schemes, local plans. For a small authority, we punch above our weight on this, and many bigger authorities are behind on their projects, which isn't a comfort, but just a statement. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. There have been various statements through the media and in Parliament in the last few days relating to housing numbers. Does that make plan making easier or harder?
Adrian?
Thank you, Chair. I think we're quite in early days in terms of those statements, but my suggestion in terms of what I've heard so far is that it makes it harder. It takes away the comfort of a certain number of housing through the standard method, and I think we'll bring about a lot more debate or be a reasonable number of houses to be provided in the
I know you're not covered in this, but it would be one that the government would once and for all make its mind up on housing numbers, but there you go. Any more on the local development scheme? Councillor Joshi.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, I don't know if it relates or not, but on the local plan, there's a part of land within Oadby, in Florence Bragg Way, that isn't part of the local plan, but it's been given planning permission, has been put into development. Do we?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I don't think it falls within the remit of the local development scheme. You can always ask Adrian after the meeting.
I sent an email.
Okay, thank you. On the local development scheme, the document before you, any more questions? No, the recommendations are that the content of the report be noted and that the local development scheme 2022 be approved. I shall move it. Seconder, Councillor Boyce. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? Thank you. Agenda item 11, 2023-24 draft revenue budget.
Councillor.
What? I'm sorry.
Could I ask a question for clarification?
Of course.
Chair, what are the implications of not having adopted a local plan? Just quickly, sorry, I'm not asking for a detail.
Sorry, Councillor Hatt, we have resolved this and voted on it. I am going to move on. You can, of course, ask the question after the meeting of Adrian, no problem at all.
I was just, Chair, looking for one word answer.
I'm sorry, we've moved on from that. Agenda item 11, draft revenue budget medium-term financial plan. Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. So this report builds on the presentation a few weeks ago to this committee. It sets out the draft revenue budget of the general fund and has a revenue account and the proposals, budget proposals and scale of fees and charges that sit behind these. It also sets out the draft 5-year capital programme and seeks PFD approval to take forward a council tax raise of 2.99% and social rent increase of 7%.
Finally, it recommends the budget to council. Recommends that the budget is recommended to council for statutory consultation to commence. The intended consultation will run from mid-December to the end of January. Comments received will be brought back to PFD for consideration against the final budget being recommended to council for approval later in February. It's important to still caveat that the local government finance settlement is due around the 21st of December, so there are risks that remain within the funding position
next year, and these are highlighted in the report. And with that, Chair, I'll take the remainder of the report to read.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, questions? Councillor Lilly-Councilman.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question. I'm very curious on page 57, Martin Green, the car parking, that the council would not raise car parking charges on the basis that the car parking trading account shows immediate surplus etc., etc. A lot of local authorities next year are going to raise their car parking charges. So I'm very pleased that we've made this a statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions on this? Councillor Kevin Lordell?
It's page 70, right on the very bottom.
70.
Question I'm sure you'll get. The audit fees, I think there's a little bit more behind the 249,000. Perhaps you could just clarify what that means, please.
So for the audit fee budget is made up of two areas, the fees to cover our external audit and the fees to also cover our internal auditor fees. As you know, we contract out to CW Audit, who provide that internal audit service for us. The external audit fees are due to increase next year in the region of 12%. Further into the future, we've been notified that audit fees are likely to increase by 150% from 2024. The budgetary increase that you see here this evening has been updated since it was last presented to members in November, and it now reflects that 12% increase on fees for next year. And it also reflects the position for the internal auditors and the anticipated contract fees for next year also.
Councillor Lordell?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a good explanation. I think it's important to clarify the fact that it's the external audit, which is a statutory requirement for all authorities to have. We've got no choice. Therefore, it's their fees that are now becoming quite exorbitant. When you look at what their increase is going to be over a period in time. How we negotiate that is I'm sure, our 151 officer is doing her best to actually do that. I know that. I've met with, the other week, on a course with our external auditors, and everybody, the new contract they've got with those other authorities who sat around the table I was with, were equally concerned about the fact that their external audit fees are going to go up by a significant amount, a real burden on the taxpayer of this borough and other boroughs as well. So you've got no choice. That's the bit. It's a statutory requirement. You've got no choice. So it's important you separate the two. Thank you.
Take that on board, Councillor Lloydell, and in future reports I think we will separate internal and external audit in terms of our budgetary framework also. Just responding to the comment, clearly providing a public service does need a high quality audit, and we are not being exposed to audit fee increases that are any different to any other organisation. So it is a difficult trade-off in terms of paying a fair price for the work that the auditors do, ensuring that as a public service we're held accountable.
Thank you. Councillor Walter? Is he on mute?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not now. Mrs. Bingham, a few weeks ago we went through a consultation with central government regarding social housing fees and proposed increase or otherwise, and we arrived at a figure that we thought was fair and equitable, which was less than the 7% that the government is now recommending. What's happened to that report that we filled out and took great debate in doing, and I believe that the chair of the committee also was involved in that.
Thanks, Councillor Bolter. So the document that we responded to was the consultation by central government on social housing rent cap. At the time, the government was suggesting a 5% cap. What we did in that paper was we set out the financial impact, and we said that we could absorb a 5% rent cap should the government move forward with that intention. But we were also clear to suggest that actually rent increases should be a matter for localities and should be a matter for local politicians. The recommended position from officers is that we maximise that rental increase to 7% for next year, but it is within members' gift to look at a different rent increase opportunity should they so wish. So the report does set out different options and the financial impact of doing those. And they are set out at table 5 on page 65.
You want to come back, Councillor Bolter?
Yes, I think we need to look at it again, Chair, before we make a final decision on the social rents. Not this evening.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Boyce.
Sorry, Chair, on that particular issue, we would need advice as to what the implications are of delaying that decision.
This is a recommendation which will go to full council next week. So any implications, I'm sure Mrs Bingham will highlight prior to the council meeting. Tracy?
I mean, the implications is that we are developing a draft budget that we are going out to public consultation in the middle of December following council. So we need to resolve and have a position to move forward with by December. The officer recommendation is 7%. There are other options set out in the report. The additional rental income of that 7% is £356,000. And as I said on page 65, at table 5, the additional income compared to the current year is also set out for the 3% and 5% options. So I'd urge members this evening to make a recommendation to council based on their preferred percentage increase so that we can proceed with the consultation on the budget ahead of final budget approval in February.
Sorry, what page is that, Tracy?
Page 65, table 5.
Thank you. Councillor Boyce, want to go on?
Well, as you say, the logic is to go out to consult. It's always better to consult on a higher figure than you can come down. It's a bit like a bargaining issue. You never start at the bottom and go up because people won't do it. So you will start at the top and come down. I think it's appropriate to consult on 7%. I think it's also appropriate, bearing in mind that for a number of years, our housing was actually not only controlled but also reduced by central government, and that bearing in mind inflation is running at 10%, 7% is actually quite a moderate increase, and clearly our fees, our costs are going up significantly. So I think it's only appropriate to consult by agreeing that 7% is the figure we consult on.
And that 7% question, which is, you know, for most people going to be not very relevant, only 5% of the dwellings in this borough are council accommodation. And you can be pretty sure the consultation is going to say those people who are in council accommodation say it's too high, and those who are not are probably not going to have any view whatsoever. So is it possible to ask a dual question, 5% or 7%? Or what's the question around 7%? Do you think it's high, too low, about right? I mean, most people are not going to have a clue.
I think the point, Chair, is that 7% is below inflation, and that bearing in mind we have had to reduce council house costs and so on in the last few years, 7% is perfectly reasonable in my view.
So in a sense, it's catch-up.
Yeah.
Okay. Tracy?
If I can, Chair, social rent policy is standard, so it's very... It does happen, but typically councils will adhere or follow the rent guidance in terms of the social rent policy, which is usually inflation plus 1%. Now that would see us clearly running at 11, 12%, and that's why the government has stepped in and intervened here. What I can tell you of the 6 local authorities across all of the local authorities in Leicestershire, and it does exclude Rutland actually, but across Leicester and Leicestershire, 6 of the housing authorities, which is all of them, are all intending to increase their rents by the cap level, which is the 7%.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Lloydell. Kevin.
Yes, sorry. I just come back to the audit thing. I think it's important because the message is we've got people, our residents, don't appreciate the fact that all local authorities have to have a statutory audit, and I welcome that. It's checks and balances that all authorities should have. It should give confidence to the people out there that we, in fact, are in control of our finances and in a positive way. But equally, they should know that audit fees used to be a central funded activity coming down from the government. But unfortunately, what they're doing is absorbing their own responsibilities and passing those costs down to the local authorities. Therefore, what will obviously happen is that the council tax has to go up locally because of that particular move. And I think it's important we get that message over to our residents. If you increase the council tax, it's not necessarily because we want to increase it, it's because central government are passing their responsibilities over to local authorities, therefore knock-on effect of that is an increase in council tax. And I find that quite offensive that the government passes out its responsibility, but looks after itself, when I think, so we'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, they've given themselves a good pay rise, I understand, allegedly.
Okay, there's no question there, thank you. Councillor Geoffrey Kaufman.
Yeah, it's a bit carrying on from Councillor Owen just now. We send the bills out, got our logo on it and our name on it. And if you're to meet members of the public, as I did, we had a meeting last night with 100 residents of Owen attending. It was to do with Dr. surgery, but they were there. And it was very difficult to persuade the residents that we don't spend the £2,000 a year that people pay in council tax, or whatever the figure is. We try to explain to them there that we're the collectors, but we collect it on behalf of the county, the police and everybody like that. My question is the design of the council tax bill statutory? Is there a way that we can easily point it out to the residents who is spending the money? Is there going to be a leaflet going out with the bill that could possibly explain that? Because I don't mind getting the blame for something I'm responsible for, part of the group that's responsible for it. But I think it is very important that the public know that how the percentage rise is from the county council, maybe for a good reason, but it comes from there, and that how much they're actually paying for the services that we produce. So can we bear that in mind when we send something out?
Tracy?
So to your question, yes, the council tax letter is statutory, so there are certain prescriptive requirements for that bill. However, one of the things that we don't do here, but we have plans to do from next year, is produce a council tax guide, which will give that breakdown. It will do a nice pie chart. It'll explain what the average council tax is and who gets those precepts and for what services. So we'll produce that next year. We'll explore whether or not we can include that with the council tax demands going out. We'll explore that. And there is also a leaflet going out with council tax that will focus on services and costs. So I think, to your question, I think we can cover that and respond to that. On the wider point of council tax increases, I did pick up at the last committee, there was a real strong request around, in terms of any information that goes to the public, that we ensure that, the council tax increase
is as a result of the inflation pressures and other cost pressures that the council is facing, and just being really clear that we articulate that. So I have ensured that we've taken that on board and working with the comms manager to ensure that message is succinctly put across as part of the consultation.
Yes, Geoffrey?
Can I also suggest that in a simple form on this same leaflet, we indicate how much money less is coming in from central government as well?
Okay.
If that is permissible, yes, but...
Well, obviously, I don't know, obviously, do something that's not
Tracy will explore that. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. I mean, central government doesn't actually get off the fence until December the 21st this year is the projected date. And in reality, that is the provisional figure. It wouldn't surprise me if we actually haven't fixed the council tax before the settlement is actually finalised. Appendix 1 which is the list of cost pressures and potential savings. Can I confirm, A, that black is actually bad and red is good, which is slightly odd. Nonetheless, that's the way it works. And the final figure of 99,000, sorry, is that a net figure or actually I think it's just a figure of the savings?
It's a total value of the page that's before it, so page 74. So it runs from Bushlow House down to events. It's the subtotal of those. For some reason, we have a subtotal on those and then not on the other tables, which isn't helpful. So apologies for that formatting issue. I'll take that on board. And also, I can't explain why the red and blacks are that way around. I think it's an Excel formatting issue, but we'll, again, take that on board and ensure that's corrected for the
Thank you for
versions.
It doesn't speed up the reading, that's all.
Clarity is desired. Really does help. Okay, any more questions on this agenda item? Okay, the recommendations are that the committee approve a recommendation to increase council tax by the core referendum limit of 2.99%. To approve a recommendation to increase rents by the maximum social rent level of 7%. Having approved and approve the recommendations as set out above, recommend to council the draft revenue budget for 23-24, draft capital programme 23-24, 25-26 for consultation, and note the indicative assurance statement provided by the section 151 officer. I will move from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kelly Lloyd. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, agenda item 12 is the committee work plan. That is for information only. It's a movable feast in Milburn, but it gives us a rough idea of where we're going. Agenda item 13 is the update we had tonight. I need to read a statement. Urgent item admitted to meeting under section 100B, brackets 4, brackets B of the Local Government Act 1972. Resolved that by reason of special circumstance, in that an additional item of business needs to be considered before the next meeting of this council, I am of the opinion that the following item of business should be considered at this meeting as a matter of urgency, and I am of this option for the following reasons. Sorry, Mr. Gill.
Of this opinion, not option.
Sorry.
Just an option.
It does say option. I am of the opinion for the following reasons. Remind me, Mr. Thorpe, what are the reasons?
Chair, the reason is that the work has got so it's ongoing, and therefore we need an urgent decision on this item so that it can feed into the work plan and not delay the work plan.
Okay, any introduction, Mr. Thorpe?
John Bull.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As members are aware, construction of the council's new headquarters at Vauxhall is now well underway. The workers rebuilt several maintenance to do with the existing building that needs to be rectified to ensure that the fabric of the building is in fit state for the future, and it's the urgent item this evening. In particular, the atrium is leaking, which is damaged with a drain to the roof, and the doors and windows to the balcony are not providing adequate watertight seal to the building. The quotation for the cost of these issues is at circa £210,000. The work needs to be undertaken now because there are savings. We're doing it as part of the overall refurbishment. It's better to carry out the work whilst the building is closed, and it will avoid any further damage to the fabric of the building. There's a sufficient contingency budget to fund the cost of this work. However, given that we are at a relatively early stage in the construction works, it would be high risk to commit a contingency budget to this work at this time. The report therefore recommends approval of a supplementary budget of £210,000 to cover the cost of the works, But if a contingency budget remains unspent or spent in part at the end of the project, then the money is left in the contingency budget will be used to fund the cost of this work. The report also provides an update on the overall budget position of the overall budget of £3.127 million has been spent or committed. The total forecast spend remains at £3.618 million. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Thorpe. I'm glad we're still keeping within budget on this. It's always a worry when you do these large projects. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. For clarity, I will read the report. I was there on Thursday making a video to introduce what work has been done so far, which is actually quite interesting. It's moved quite significantly already, and certainly in terms of some of the big work, like putting in the mezzanine floor or the additional floor, that's already taken place. I also was shown the atrium roof, which simply will not last. There's no question of that. There's no question that because it was built 3 years ago and was built in a way to show experiments, and therefore some of the structural methods used, whilst were sound and were perfectly okay, it was experimental. It was showing where technology could go. And clearly, we are changing from an experimental building, a building showing scientific progress, to a building which actually needs to be safe for people to work in. And I think it's absolutely appropriate that this work is carried out. I think it's appropriate to put that potential, well, that additional cost up front rather than hide it in contingency. And therefore, I think it's absolutely right we do this at this point. And it's also right that we do this so we do not delay the project. And therefore, as I said earlier, I move the report.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hack, seconded. Any questions on this item? No? Okay, the recommendations are there. A, that members approve a supplementary budget of 210,000 to cover the cost of the works outlined. B, that members note that if the contingency budget remains unspent or spent in part at the end of the project, and the monies left in the contingency budget will be used to fund the costs of the works outlined in paragraph 1.3, thus reducing or eliminating the need to spend the supplementary budget. And C, that the update on the overall budget position is noted. Moved, it's been seconded. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. That concludes the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance and for your questions.
Next